It's becoming ever more clear that our planet here has gone through quite a few amount of catastrophes over a period of time. And in fact, our revelations of knowing such was held off by science, which seemingly was fighting against an idea of there ever being a biblical catastrophe in humanity going on. And even though the Younger Dryas event was something that was far, far removed from that time, it actually was part of the mythologies of the Great Flood that led to that concept that we still have. And in a modern time, we're starting to find that there's a little too much correlated data to the fact of the Younger Dryas. It's been over-confirmed now. But it just needs to be presented and put out there to the public in a better way and in a concise way. But we've been hit by quite a few times, and this idea going on of asteroids hitting us. One guy that's astronomer that I watch his videos on sometimes showed a video where they've come out with a paper revealing the fact that the dinosaur event that we all know of that was 65 million years ago was actually not the event that we thought that it was. And it involved a 1-2 punch with a finish-off maneuver. That the Chicxulub crater happening in the edge of the ocean did so much to set things off, but then it also rained back down on the planet over a period of time. But that original event also cracked the Earth's crust a little bit, and apparently that led to a lot of volcanic activity which formed after it. And it went on for a period of time. It's somewhere between 15,000 and 500,000 years. It's hard to get exact dating on this, but then after that volcanic activity, another asteroid hit us over in Siberia. And so again, it was more of a 1-2, get them all set up and dizzy, and then pow, and take them all out. And that led to dinosaurs becoming chickens, and that gave rise also to a creature that gave rise to a creature that gave rise to modern humanity. But looking at the Younger Dryas event, again, for more data that's coming out and correlating with this, and people are looking at situations of all the flora and fauna that had died off at that time, and they've already made correlations. I remember whenever I was a kid, they talked about during the last ice age how all these creatures were in North America and they aren't here anymore. That we used to have giraffes, and we used to have camels and mammoths and all kinds of creatures that really we've got a llama type thing left over at the end, but alpacas and so on, but a little bitty sloth now, but there used to be gigantic sloths and all kinds of creatures that are no longer in the North American continent, but also on the world. And it left us with the only giants that are left on the planet of being kept in a land of the lost down in Africa. In fact, whenever I had a book whenever I was a kid, one of the things that they showed was dinosaurs, and then a few pages later were showing animals in Africa, and I was able to look at that and go, well, there's some remnants of that left over, and a giraffe has that long neck like some of these other guys, but too much time has been removed from that idea. Well, that's not what really this video is about either. For what we're finding whenever this comet that apparently, here's the theory, the comet had apparently shattered into pieces but held together somewhat and stretched itself out after going around the sun, and that left it aimed right directly at where the Earth was going to be shortly. And so we got peppered, almost a shotgun effect, kind of like what you're looking at here, but this is all showing it coming in right after each other. And we're looking at now where it looks like a few pieces and a bunch of small ones, which might have led to small effects came in at once, like a shotgun effect. But there were other effects that came after that, and even though it looks like it was scattered across North America and all the way into Europe and through into the Middle East, with Abu Huraira being the most farthest boundary there, when they found it there, from what I hear, they took samples from a few hundred yards away, and then they tried to take test samples showing that it wasn't there and that there was something that had happened locally, and they checked miles away, and after a couple of tests they were miles away and yet still finding it, and they had to go quite some distance before the patch of all this crystalline material and such that's associated with effects like this weren't showing up in the test digs. So we got hit kind of a 1-2 punch too, and there appears to have been volcanic area activity in the in-between, but also there was a lot of forest burning. In fact, they say that some 60 to 80% of the primordial forest across North America and Europe, all through Siberia and all those stars, burnt away, and then of course got flooded out. So there was stories of great fire that had taken out humanity, but then of course we all know that a lot of people would talk about stories of a great flood, and a lot of that was just the fact that they lived around the coastal areas just like modern humanity does in a large percentage, and therefore when that all went away, it had gone away in that effect. But when these bolide events came down and exploded, and more than one perhaps, but in this penetrative effect, it released so much into the atmosphere, and some of it rained back onto the atmosphere, and in doing so it caused a lot of wildfires, things to continue on. And if you thought it was over, for over a generation easily past, things that had been ejected into the atmosphere were coming back down, hitting it, or there were semi-orbital type things that started falling back upon the earth. If you don't think we've been hit by a lot of debris like this, just take a look at our moon. People try to say it was a great protector, but it keeps its one face facing at us, so everything that you see as far as those craters go came right over our shoulder and smacked it. So it's not so much the great protector, it was the one thing that caught and is able to show us by looking at it how many of these huge things had happened. But oddly, whenever we talked about the Chicxulub event, whenever I first heard of it happening, I thought, wow, on the map, Florida bending around and the way it bends around in Texas and then turns into the Yucatan Peninsula, that makes kind of sense. It blew up and made a big old crater there, and that, take out that something that big, that was it, huh? And then to come to find out, no, where I dove before in Cozumel and Cancun there, wasn't that big, wasn't too much bigger than the one in Arizona. In reality's concept. So kind of left me with the thought that we could be much more frail than that people gave credit for, because it seems that didn't take that much. Well, it looks like we would have come back from it somewhat on the Chicxulub event if it had been solo, and if we wouldn't have had Toba type volcanic events going on after it in the 500,000 years that goes past, or somewhere between 15 and 500,000 years, so 500,000 years really. But the crater giving the farthest extreme of both of them, earliest and of Chicxulub and latest of the one that's in Siberia, it can span 500,000 years, or 500,000 years. So whatever was trying to creep back up and get itself back going real well during that time was having to fight off volcanic things, but then another event happened and pow, and that was it. It turned dinosaurs into chickens, and then gave rise to the thing that gave rise to modern humanity. We're looking at the Younger Dryas event here, and just to show you a few things, finger of God here, if you will. This is the Younger Dryas event, and what we've noticed now is that this was coming back up from out of the last ice age and coming back up, and in doing so it was reading a gradient about like this. So there's a anomaly here with the younger, or the Baylorod event that's here, Allering Baylorod event. And right after it, which seems to be above the gradient, it dropped down harshly, and it almost seems like it's done in steps here. So it could have been a pow, 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 and then eventually a pow here too, but then it comes right back up and gets right in line where it was supposed to, and comes back up, but then there's more, what was that? And it reaches back to its fullness, right? This is known as the Younger Dryas event. The Dryas is a type of flower that only grows right on the edge of the Arctic type, and so by it showing up right back here, going on and then disappearing, it showed that it had already been warmed back up to the point and then disappeared. And they find this in pollen and so on. The ice cores have revealed so much. Now places all around the planet have realized that, or gave forth the reality that we actually had this event to happen. And it left a bunch of these crystalline structures that we are all real familiar with if you get into any of this meteorific effects. And so this had happened and dropped down to do it. Where we're at now is right here at this very edge here. And so we had a medieval warm period we can see coming up here, but then also it's followed by the Little Ice Age, and we're coming out of the Little Ice Age now, and so we're looking at all this melting, and they're saying, oh my gosh. But we'll see here and then in the next slide that isn't really the fact. That's not what this video is about, and all the propaganda that goes along with that. But in the last 4,000 years, the warmest point was by far, well, in the last few thousand years it was here, but 4,000 years by far was here, and 10,000 years was up in here. And in fact, the coldest point that we've had, still right there. So we have all of these effects that have gone on with it, right? Snow accumulation goes on with it too. So you think that we see this weird effect, but we don't have one that's associated with it. It follows the graph. So this is dated around the time of Atlantis and all that people talk about, but something else correlates to this too, for we know that we've lost all this flora and fauna over the planet, and all the great mammoths were gone, the great sloths and all the creatures we talked about, and they're no longer here. But also there's this bottleneck. Now recently in a video that we did talking about something quite unrelated really to this event, but actually somewhat related, showed that there was not really a bottleneck in the Out of Africa event, and that's just number 27 in a series of reasons while that model doesn't even work anymore. In fact, the model that they had recreated doesn't work anymore, and it still doesn't work anymore, and more things are being revealed about that and humanity and who showed up when and all of those situations that go along with that. But looking at this graph here, now this was in a video that was in Antonio Zamora's videos. He's a guy that's shown a whole lot about the Younger Dryas event, and the Carolina Bays was what he was famous for showing in the first part, and all of this ejective that looks like it created them in the first place. But getting deeper into it, genetics, which is kind of odd, like me getting into all this archaeology and finally genetics reaching a point that we can utilize it, we're finding out a lot of different things here. Here's this rainbow flag on your left that you're looking at, and that is the different forms of humanity that are there. And you can look on your left and you can see that the red is associated with Africa, and it went along with getting a little bit thicker with its Y haplotypes. So this is Y chromosomal, showing that there was a bottleneck that happened in Y chromosome diversity right at that point, and it coincides with a global change. That's at the Younger Dryas event, and this was put together by Carmen and others, plus 100 other doctors, or 100 other correlators for this data here. And this is basically looking at all the skeletons and the DNA and the Y chromosomes we have of everybody and putting them on a timeline together, and then seeing how it changed and realizing that at the Younger Dryas boundary here, everything was pumping along and getting a little thicker, and then all of a sudden, pow, and then it came back up. And if you look, it really goes pow along with it here, but the timeline here, it goes in thousands, and the timeline here is much more drawn out. So even though it shows this rapid spike here, and this is showing a big trough, if this was to drawn out to the timeline there, this would be more of a spike. But there is a period of time here at the bottom. This wasn't a spike event like it shows here, but due to all that mankind went through in here, it dropped down and became much less. So in Africa, we can see that there was some diversity going on, but then, of course, it got knocked down to almost zilch, and then came back up. Above Africa there, we're looking at orange, and that's the Near East and Caucasus, or Caucasian type people, and they were building up quite a bit, and then at this point, they dropped off, and then got a huge spike up. In fact, way more than they were in the gradient that they were standing above. So it seems like due to the events, and we're realizing now they had admixing events with all types of humanity coming before and into this event, that perhaps this is showing that remixing, but that remixing also forming different Y chromosomal patterns somehow. A diversity that's brought back in rehybridization with oneself after being different than another, forming a third thing is in A plus B equals C. Because looking at modern genetics, they're showing that N leads to a lot of others after it and so on. Certain patterns like CT leads to E and all these other ones that they go on, so they know they lead to it because of their connectives. Regardless of that, other ones that we can look at on this pattern here, so the yellow one that we can see is also European, so you can see why they would connect this to it. And there are also Caucasians in Africa, of course, all of North Africa, and so this all connects and it makes this big dip. So it's not that it even shows it in one locality. Okay, that's one thing you can see through this, is that all colors make a dramatic dip. In fact, the one that makes the least dramatic dip at first is the yellow European and orange Caucasus, but there's an extreme pinch point that's right here, and then it rises to its point again with the diversity that we see in Caucasians today. It is apparently a collective of them coming back together, and then of course some of those having a slight diversity due to hybridization with other hominids that still existed to this point, which I've shown in recent videos, and they're gone by the time this spike starts going back up. And really that spike on the right is really looking at all the forms of modern humans that have been hybrided into that point, and all of the Homo erectus forms are no longer extant. They're gone, pretty much, except for we might realize that some of the people left today are actually a form of that with a hybridization, and so that might be looked at differently a little bit later. But you can look at South Asia and how it, even that far away on the other side of the planet, if you will, how it took a dramatic dip, how Central Asia followed, how Southeast and East Asia took another drop along with it too. But then above that, that pink, Siberia, and how the people up in Siberia dropped to nil. And above that, they were already showing that there were people in the Andes, but these people in the Andes dropped to nil again, but then it rose again out of that. And you can see whenever the Caucasians rise out of it, they become a thick band. They become a thick band, thick band, thick band. There are others that are thinner, and there are others that are no longer extant or mixtures of two colors. And they don't show that because if you mixed any of those colors on the left, they're pretty much other that we're talking about. You'd end up with a black or a brown type weird color, and it wouldn't show as well. And they can't really show necessarily a mixture. Something else we can see from this graph here that's evident is over here. Let's see if I can take it down just a little bit further. And if you look over here at the far right on that graph that's going out of the screen here, in this Younger Dryas boundary event, there are red and there's green. The red is the temperature that was going on and how it drops and comes back up. And the blue, is the amount of methane we're detecting in the ice cores. And you can see they're following each other pretty well, but then there was this point where that boiling Ellerod is coming back down during the spikes, right? It doesn't correlate to it. So that was an anomaly that's high, that's still looked upon, but it seems to really follow all the way with it, doesn't it? Till we get over here to the end. And as we start warming back up, which is still nowhere near as warm as places that have been in the last 10,000 years, if we were looking farther at this graph like we were looking earlier, you notice how the cow farts don't seem to go with it. That's something too, where it's actually showing you that right there at the very end, it seems to be almost a stable amount. And sure, it starts to rise due to our extreme amount of cattle that we're getting after that point and up into modern day. But it's nowhere catching up to the point. In fact, so that shows you one point that the rising really had nothing to do with cow farts, and the balding Ellerod didn't either or any way before, because we believe cows were being domesticated all the way back here now in a lot of these circles where we look at it. So a lot of data can be seen out of that, and I wonder what Egyptologist 7 could do with this, with a few papers and some correlated data like she does, right? For what we're looking at here is mankind's drop of, in some cases, 95% of the different forms of humanity we have. And with the new studies that we found of Dragon Man, and if he doesn't correlate to Denisovans, there's one that didn't make it. That was real recent. If it shows up to be Denisovans, then that makes a whole lot of other correlations, doesn't it? So we're waiting on that effect too, but just thought I'd show this to you here because it's showing you that, well, not only were animals affected greatly, but yeah, we're one of those. And how greatly were we affected? Well, we almost weren't here. Literally, this spike point comes down and pinches for each of these colors here to a point that some of these people were almost not here. In the African diversity, we could coin or chop up some of that to the idea that the hominids that were still existing, living to a long time, formed into a different creature after that and become that little hump that's after it, and that's the reason for its hump. And that there was greater diversity in the Caucasus type people and the European types that we know about that were extant there, but it both pinches down to an extreme small amount, even though it comes back and really blossoms after that. There's nothing that would lead you to believe that there was a Noah or an Adamic point of any way going on here. But it does show you that humanity almost was not able to even talk to you right now and give you a video not too long ago. That if something just a little order of magnitude harder would have happened during this dip that goes on here, that we wouldn't have this conversation right here. And if something right in here or just past would have happened again in that 1, 2, 3 punch, it surely would be gone. So let me know what you think about this data. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy.